Are going to begin on Chav Gimel Amud Beis towards the bottom, 23b3, top of 23b3. Thank you, Ezra, for covering yesterday. I heard it was great from a number of people now. Okay, so let's what today's Gemara is really going to be the culmination of our entire discussion about Isuri Hana. Tomorrow we're going to go on some tangents around it, but today is going to be not just the conclusion; it's also going to be the summation. It's really going to be an entire review / some new ideas to really flesh out this idea that there are about things which are usher to eat, forbidden to eat, as well as forbidden to benefit from. So let's see. Yasvahu merabanan kameid Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani. There was a student who was sitting in front of Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani. V'yasvika amar mishmeid Rav Yeshua ben Levi, and he quoted in the name of Rav Yeshua ben Levi the following: Min layin l'chol yisurin sheb'Torah. Where do we know that all things which are prohibited, dechi hechid asur machila, just like they are forbidden, it is prohibited to eat. Hachidami yisur bana. So too, it is prohibited to benefit. Okay, umayniyu. And although he says, where do we know from all things? We've concluded already based on yesterday. What does it actually really include? Only really two things. Chametz b'Pesach. We know that we're referring to chametz on Pesach, v'shar niskal, and the ox that is to be stoned, right? Because if you recall, all the other prohibitions, based on qualifications that were built into the psukim, really they're only asur b'achila. But again, the question is, how do you know that chametz b'Pesach and the shar niskal, the ox that they ruled that it's going to be killed? How do we know that not only is it forbidden to eat it, it is also forbidden to benefit from it? Okay, so the Gemara says, "Minayin, from where?" Rav Shmuel ben Nachmani interrupts the student and he says, "From where? Tepukle mi lo yachel." The pasuk says, "It shall not be eaten." Who is that? Who said that? That was Chizkiah's approach. Chizkiah said, "Lo yachel shall not be eaten" means not you should not eat it, but it shall not be eaten implies you cannot feed it to others. So the student answers, "Lo yachel isra achila mashmalei, isra na lo mashmalei." He counters. So the student who is speaking says, "It shall not be eaten." It only implies a prohibition against consumption, right? And this aligns with Rav Avahu. Rav Avahu argued with Chizkiah and said the words "lo yachel" really they mean don't eat it. Really they mean don't eat it, and therefore you can't really infer from there that it includes a prohibition against benefit. So says the Gemara, typically nevela. Okay, we saw from Rav Avahu that we learn it from nevela. What do you mean? The Torah says a nevela carcass shall not be eaten. Give it to the non-Jew, and give it to the and sell it. Bottom line is you're allowed to benefit from it. And Rav Avahu said you're able to learn from there to everywhere else. That just if by nevela it has to qualify and say you're allowed to benefit from it, that means that everywhere else you are not allowed to benefit from it, right? By allowing a carcass in benefits is saying that the implication is that had it not done so, it would be prohibited in benefits, and therefore we can infer from there that everything else is forbidden in benefit. So says the Gemara, Savalak Rabbi Yehuda. If you recall, and this is where our review comes in, that was what we just quoted was the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda was the one who said that no, those psukim have to be read literally. That it said again, the pasuk said, give it to the ger toshav and sell it to a non-Jew. If it's meant to be read in a critical fashion like that, then you can't start making inferences because it's needed ligufe. It's needed for its own teaching, and therefore you can't make any inferences from it. So he says, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can't use that pasuk. So Gemara says, like Rabbi Yehuda. Fine, if you hold like Rabbi Yehuda, learn it from where Rabbi Yehuda learned it from. Where? The fact that the Torah says you should throw it to the dog implies, as Rabbi Yehuda, as we saw earlier, Rabbi Yehuda says it should be thrown to the dog. Other things are not allowed to be thrown to the dog, and that's where Rabbi Yehuda gets it from. The Gemara says, "Kisavar chulin shenishchatu bazar daraisa." If you recall that Rabbi Yehuda, that we concluded yesterday, that Rabbi Yehuda says that we're able to learn from Oso to teach us that other things are prohibited in benefits. But what that does is it leaves me no verse to teach me that unconsecrated items that are slaughtered in the courtyard are going to be forbidden in benefits, because Rabbi Yehuda learned that prohibition is rabbinic. But if you hold it's biblical, then you have a problem. So we say that. So Rabbi Yeshua, so the Gemara is saying the author of this whole teaching, i.e. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, holds that unconsecrated items which are slaughtered in the base of Mikdash are actually asur midoraisa, and therefore we need that pasuk of lakel tashlichon oso. So the Gemara says, fine. So let's find a new source. Okay, so where do we learn that other things are forbidden in benefits? Pasuk says any chatas offering from which blood was brought, okay, it cannot be eaten. It should be burnt on the fire. Okay, any chatas offering that the blood was brought, it shall not be eaten. It should be burnt in fire. See already, there's an extra thing going on here. You don't need to say it should be burnt in fire, as we'll see in a moment. Why do you have to say it should be burnt in fire? We don't need it for itself. Why? So rough, because we already learned regarding a chatas offering. It says it shall be burnt. We're at 23b4. Today we're in so we have an extra word, right? It says don't eat it. Fine. And then it says burn it in fire. But we already know you should need to burn the chatas offering, so it says elsewhere you should burn it, and therefore we have this extra word. It should be burned to teach us. It's extra. So what does it teach us? It teaches us about other prohibitions, i.e. chametz on Pesach and the ox to be stoned, 24a1. And if we don't need this pasuk teaches about a prohibition against eating, why? Because we already know from the Torah it says don't eat the ox, don't eat chametz. You could then apply the prohibition to apply this prohibition to tell us you can't benefit from it either. Wait a second, but the verse says burn it. So that would mean that the ox and chametz have to be burnt only. So Gemara says no. With holy it should be burnt on fire. Bakodesh b'sreifa, teaching you specifically the holy things have to be burnt, i.e. the karbanos, etc., have to be burnt in fire. But other prohibited items do not have to be eliminated through burning, and therefore that would seem to be the source. Ask the Gemara, wait a second, this pasuk is being used for something else. You want to tell me that the words within the holy to be burnt to the fire is used for this? No. It's needed for a different teaching. The time of Shimon Omer, okay, the verse that we just quoted that says in the holy items it should be burnt to the fire is Lord for teaching us what? Teach us that a chatas offering that became invalid has to be burnt, but where is it burnt? Bakodesh, in a holy place. In other words, you may have thought a chatas offering which becomes invalid, or an item, a holy thing which becomes invalid, burn it anywhere. No, Bakodesh Beish Yisrael, teaching me, has to be specifically burnt there. Vainly Elazo Bavad, and that's specifically for a chatas, Psule Kache Kachim, Memura Kache Kalim. How do you know other sacrificial items which are invalid? Minayin, how do you know they also have to be burnt in the courtyard? Tamalomar, Bakodesh Beish Yisrael. Okay, so you learn from the extra words Bakodesh Beish Yisrael teach you that all holy items are burnt specifically in the temple courtyard, but the bottom line is that verse that we were trying to learn from is no longer available to us. Amrle, Rav Yonasan, Rabach Mehaikra Amrle. So Rav Shmuel ben Achmeni, the student says to Rav Shmuel ben Achmeni that Rav Yonasan, who is the teacher of Rav Shmuel ben Achmeni, learns it from the following pasuk. The pasuk says, "V'im basar mibsar hamilum min alechem adaboker." The pasuk says that if there is leftover from the inauguration offering, okay, so on the day that they inaugurated the Mishkan, there was an offering brought, and the pasuk says if there's leftover, then what do? You shall burn the leftover, it shall not be eaten, for it is holy. Okay? You should burn it, don't eat it, it's holy. Okay, you don't have to say it shouldn't be eaten, as we'll explain in a moment. What do we learn from the words it shall not be eaten? If we don't eat it for itself, why? It says burn it. If you burn it, you're obviously not eating it, right? So what? So say take the words "don't eat it" and apply it to other prohibitions. 24a2. And if it's not used for eating, because again, when it comes to chametz and the ox, which we're learning towards, we know it says already by those psukim you shall not eat it. Then eating l'isra'ana, apply it to a prohibition against benefits. Ima kan b'sreifa. Oh, wait a second. Again, the source is telling you have to burn it. Af kol yisur b'sreifa. That would mean that chametz and the ox have to be burnt. Amar kravis saraftis hanosar b'sreifa v'in kol. The pasuk says, burn the nosar, teaching you it's limited to these sacrificial items, but not the ox and not the chametz. Wait a second, ask the Gemara, are the words that shall not be eaten used for this? The Rav Elazar says, don't eat it because it's holy. To teach you there is a negative prohibition. In other words, had the Torah not said these words, it would have said, you should burn it. You should burn it as a positive mitzvah. Burn the leftover stuff. But if I eat it, I know I would be violating that assay because I didn't burn it. But now the Torah is saying, in addition to the positive mitzvah of burning the leftovers and burning the invalid of burning the invalid things, it's also saying if I eat it, I'm also in violation of a negative prohibition. Again, that pasuk lo yachal now is being used for something, and therefore it's not left over for for us. So Amar Bayal Olam Mikra Kama. Let's go back to the first pasuk. Okay, the first pasuk was any chatas offering which blooded and brought to the tent of to the Oel Moed, it shall not be eaten; it shall be burnt in fire. Okay, the epoch. And switch things up, okay? And by switching things, we'll have something left over. Why? Initially, the way we learned it was, it says don't eat, and then we were trying to learn something from Be'esh Tisaref. Now we're saying no. The Torah should have just written Be'esh Tisaref, and it wouldn't have to say lo seachel. Okay, so ma tam lomer lo seachel. What do you do with the pasuk of it shall not be eaten? Im ena in gufo. If we don't need it for itself. Okay, it's a nafka limit of Rabbi Lazar, because we learn it from Rabbi Lazar, who we just quoted in the last paragraph, who said that any disqualified thing, you are in violation of a negative prohibition. So we just learned a negative prohibition for all disqualified items. So therefore, it's therefore lo seachel is going to be used for all other prohibitions, i.e. chametz and the ox. And again, if it's not needed for eating, say assign it. Have a prohibition for benefits. And again, you're going to tell me, okay, so if the source though is talking about burning, it should mean that the ox and chametz has to be burnt. The pasuk, by emphasizing the leftovers, telling us that it comes to kudshim, they have to be burnt. Sacrificial things have to be burnt, but not the other prohibitions. Okay, ask Gemara another question. But maybe it shall not be eaten comes to give you a negative commandment for the chatas itself. In other words, right now we are learning it from the karban chatas that gets invalid. And although we already know it's prohibited, he's asking, maybe we're coming to add a second prohibition. Maybe it's coming to tell you there's two lav. In other words, who says it's extra? The whole premise of it's extra is saying, I already know it's prohibited. Okay, but knowing it's prohibited is not the same as saying that maybe there's two prohibitions. As we're about to see, there are some mitzvos where if you violate them, you are not only going to be in violation of one avera, you're in violation of two averos. Okay? That has implications for, let's say, the amount of malchus you're going to get. If, let's say, you are in violation of two prohibitions, you'll have to get two sets of malchus, etc., etc. Fine, the bottom line is the Gemara is asking, maybe it's coming to tell you that you're going to be chayiv on its own negative commandments. Okay, sorry. Maybe it's going to come to chayiv you on your own negative commandments, and ignore what I just said a second ago. Again, maybe it's going to come to teach you your own negative commandments. Why? Even Rabbi Lazar ain't lokin alav shbeklalos. Because if we learned it from the teaching of Rabbi Lazar, what did Rabbi Lazar tell us? He told us there's a prohibition against leaving over of eating anything that is invalid. Okay? But if we just had that prohibition, it's called a lav shebeklalos. A lav shebeklalos means a collective prohibition. When there is a collective prohibition, I get no malchus. There's a rule. There's a rule that says if I say don't do X, and then I say don't do Y, then I get malchus, I get lashes for being, right, by the way, just step back. Anytime you're in violation of a prohibition, in the times of the Beis Din, you would get lashes for being in violation of the prohibition. Now, if the Torah says don't do X, and then the Torah says don't do Y, and you violated X, you get lashes. You violate Y, you get lashes. But if it said a collective term that said don't do something which includes X and Y, it's one statement, lav shebechlalos, then you wouldn't get malchus. That's a rule that when there's a collective statement, lav shebechlalos, you don't get malchus. The Gemara is asking over here, Rabbi Lazar's teaching was about all invalid sacrifices. You would not get any malchus. And therefore the Gemara is asking, the fact that Torah says by chatos, don't tell me it's extra. Maybe it's saying it's specifically by chatos. Teach me that if I'm in violation, I would get lashes. And that is important. So Ela Amar Papa, so the Gemara says you're right. Ela Amar Papa 24a3 says Rav Papa, mehacha from here, v'abasar sheyiga b'chol tamei lo yechel ba'esh isaref. Okay, so the meat, the flesh which touches anything tamei, you shouldn't be eaten, burn it in fire. So here we're talking about sacrificial meat to become tamei. Okay, so it's a new pasuk. So pasuk doesn't have to say lo echel, doesn't have to say it shouldn't be eaten. Why does it say? Because it says you should be burnt. So why does it say not eat it? You don't need to say don't eat it because you already learned a kal v'chomer from Meiser. Okay, so again, why? Uma Meiser Kal. Meiser, which is a lesser sanctity than sacrificial meat, right? Meiser is something which is given to Kohanim, given to Levium. That's something which is less, or Meiser Sheni, something which is eaten in Yerushalayim. Those are by definition less restrictive, less stringent than kachim, than sacrificial meat. And there, the Torah says that I did not consume it in a state of tumah, meaning I can't eat meiser sheni when I am tamei. So besar kodesh chamor. So that means that flesh of a sacrifice of a karban, which is much more stringent, lo kol shekain, if for sure there's going to be a prohibition, and therefore there's going to be an extra pasuk. Ask Gemara v'chitema im asir min hadin. Maybe you're going to tell me that you cannot go ahead and make a prohibition based on logic. Okay, so there are those who say that you cannot ever establish a prohibition based on logic alone. In other words, you can't open the Torah and say, well, I'm going to make a logical inference based on something the Torah says. No, you have to wait till Hashem spells it out. So even if you don't have a kal v'chomer, you do have what is known as a hekish, which means that two things are juxtaposed one to another. You can't eat the meiser, and the pasuk goes on to say, and kachim. So now puts the two together. It says Meiser and Kachim side by side. So you learn that in as much as Meiser Sheni cannot be eaten when it's in a state, when it's Tameh, so too a Karban cannot be eaten when it's Tameh. Okay, so now we've learned that you cannot eat karbanos when it's tamei matam le'achel. So what do you learn from the words "don't eat it" by karban that was tamei? If it's not relevant for itself, then apply to all of the prohibitions, i.e. chametz and the ox. And if it's not relevant for eating because we already know that's prohibited, then apply it to prohibition to benefits. And again, maybe you'll say that by the karban that's tamei you have to burn it. So afka 24:4 afka l'surish b'torah b'sreifa. So too all prohibitions you have to burn it. No, again, it's teaching you the leftovers are burnt, but these other prohibitions, i.e. chametz and the ox that is to be stoned, those are not. You don't have to eliminate them through burning. Amud Ravina Ravashi, and this is what I was saying before. I apologize, I jumped the gun. Ravina says Ravashi, wait a second. How do you know it's extra? Maybe it's coming to tell you. Now we learned one prohibition. Maybe it's coming to teach you two prohibitions. Again, you have. We're about to see. You have cases where there is more than one prohibition. So the whole premise was, it's extra because I already know it's prohibited. But that's not extra. Maybe it's saying, don't do it, because if I say it twice, then I'm actually going to be liable for 2 sets of lashes. So maybe it's coming to teach you that there are 2 lavin. So, lav mi amar Abai, didn't Abai say, achal putisa lo karba. Okay, so interestingly, out of all the different Yisurim Shabbat okay, think of eating milk and meat. Think of, think of their classic things, not working on Shabbos. Virtually all of those, when you do them, you're in violation of one prohibition. There's one thing that the Torah piles them on, and that is eating insects. Okay, so interestingly, that's usually something which tragically people are dismissive of. Oh, it's not such a big deal. Okay, for whatever reason, historically, whatever, there were limitations we had. But the bottom line is that from a halachic perspective, in some ways, not entirely, but certainly in terms of the number of violations, if you were to say, should I go ahead and, turn a light on, light a fire on Shabbos, or should I go ahead and eat something which has bugs in it, you would say, again, not that you should choose between these two things, but if you had to choose between them, you'd light the fire and you wouldn't eat something with bugs in it. Okay? I want to put that out there. Okay. Achal putisa. However, when that's a regular bug, you get 2 lavin. However, you eat in a putisa, which is a small aquatic creature, then you get lokar ba. You get 4 sets of lashes. Nemal, if you eat an ant, loka chamesh, you get 5 sets of lashes. Tzir loka shesh, if you eat a hornet, you get 6 sets of lashes. Bottom line is, you see that you could get many lashes for one prohibition. We're at 24b1. Amrale. So Ravashi says, Ravina, kol hechadik midrash darshinan v'lo makvina l'lavi seram. She says like this. There's a principle. When you have more than one prohibition, if it's able to be applied to something else, we apply it to something else. When it's explicit that it's referring to this thing, we're stuck. We say, okay, so the Torah is laying on. So by a hornet, it says 6 prohibitions, and it clearly applies to a hornet. We can't use it for something else. But when there's 2 Isurin, and one could be applied to something else, we apply it to something else. The Gemara concludes, and that is our source, last pasuk, which was talking about the kachim which become tamei. The words lo yachel over there are extra. We don't add an extra isur since it could be used for something else, and therefore it teaches us that chametz and the shar haniskal are not only going to be asur be'achila, because we already know they're asur be'achila, but they're also asur be'hana, and that is the end of this discussion. The Gemara is going to go on a few tangents, God willing, in the days to come. Have a great day.